You can't just be a no. You have to find ways to actually come up with solutions so that we can actually have a real debate.
It's not the alternative budget. This is the billionaire budget.
Brandon Johnson is showing us that when you invest in the youth of this city, they feel protected and supported.
A recent survey of 648 registered voters found that 41% say housing costs, including property taxes, insurance, and utilities, are their biggest concern. By comparison, only 23% said crime and gun violence should be the city's top priority. Just a few years ago, that would have sounded unthinkable. In 2022, nearly half of voters listed crime as their biggest concern, while only about 6% pointed to housing affordability. So what changed? Housing costs in Chicago have been steadily rising. Median home prices have climbed to about $344,000, nearly $30,000 higher than 4 years ago, while the price per square foot has increased even faster. For many residents, that means paying more money for less space, making home ownership increasingly difficult. Renters are feeling the squeeze as well, with more than 80% of residents saying rent is too high.
Buildings are competing with these new rental buildings, the luxury buildings. They command rent prices of $3,000 to up to $12,000, $15,000 a month.
At the same time, property taxes have continued their relentless climb. They've increased every year for the past 3 decades and have more than doubled over the last 10 years, pushing many households to the edge financially. In more than half a dozen areas across the city, homeowners now spend over 20% of their income just on property taxes. For many families, that number represents the difference between financial stability and constant stress. More than 60% of voters say property taxes have a major or huge impact on their ability to live comfortably.
The property taxes, that's more important than anything besides the crimes.
And an overwhelming majority, over 80%, believe government leaders are not doing enough to address the issue. But here's the twist. The surge in tax bills isn't simply the result of politicians raising rates. Instead, it's a complicated side effect of economic shifts triggered by the pandemic. Downtown Chicago's skyline still looks impressive from a distance, but behind many of those glass towers sits a new reality. Office buildings that once buzzed with activity remain partially empty. Remote work and hybrid schedules have permanently reduced demand for downtown office space.
Our goal from the start of this process was to pass a budget that did not kill jobs at a time when the city faces its worst forecast since COVID.
As a result, the value of many commercial properties has dropped sharply. And because property taxes aim to generate a fixed amount of revenue, when commercial property values fall, the burden automatically shifts elsewhere. In Chicago's case, that burden has landed squarely on homeowners. Residential property owners are now paying a larger share of the city's tax base than they did before the pandemic. For many residents, the sudden spike in their tax bills felt like a financial ambush. While homeowners struggle with rising costs, city leaders are confronting a crisis of their own.
We pay for the land our house sits on. We can own the house, but we don't own the land.
Chicago is facing a staggering $1.2 billion budget deficit. That shortfall represents nearly 1/5 of the city's operating budget, and it arrives at the worst possible time. Pandemic-era federal aid that once helped fill budget gaps is finally running out. By law, the city must pass a balanced budget before the end of the year. That requirement has set the stage for a tense political showdown. On one side stands Mayor Brandon Johnson, who rose from relative obscurity to win the mayor's office in 2023. On the other side are members of the city council, business leaders, and even powerful figures in state government. Everyone agrees the city cannot continue operating with such a massive deficit, but they sharply disagree on how to fix it. The mayor has proposed a plan centered around new taxes aimed primarily at large corporations.
This year, it's likely that the new assessment will be raising property values and the taxes that will go along with it.
His proposals include reviving a monthly head tax on businesses with more than 100 employees and raising taxes on certain services often used by companies. Johnson argues that wealthy corporations should contribute more to help stabilize the city's finances.
We are not talking about your local retail shops, however. We are not talking about your mom and pop restaurants. We are talking about the companies who have done exceedingly well in this current economic climate.
Supporters of the plan say the proposals could transform Chicago's budget and protect public services without placing additional pressure on homeowners. But critics see things very differently. Business leaders warn that higher taxes could push companies to relocate to other cities. Some city council members fear the policy could accelerate the very economic decline Chicago is trying to avoid. Even Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has voiced concerns about the mayor's approach.
Governor J.B. Pritzker is not on board.
I am absolutely foursquare opposed to a head tax for the city of Chicago.
And when the City Council Finance Committee recently voted on the proposals, The result was a decisive rejection. The committee shot down the plan by a vote of 25 to 10. Opponents argue the city should focus on reducing spending rather than raising taxes.
Until they start accepting the fact that there are solutions on the table, we have to stand up and push back against this budget.
Consultants have already identified possible savings by improving government procurement and other administrative processes. But so far, those recommendations have gained little traction. Meanwhile, Chicago's financial pressures continue to mount. Roughly 40% of the city's entire budget now goes toward paying off debt and funding pension obligations. Those long-term commitments leave city leaders with limited flexibility to address new challenges. For decades, Chicago has relied on creative but controversial financial maneuvers to plug budget holes. One of the most famous examples occurred in 2008, when the city sold a 75-year lease on its parking meters in exchange for a large upfront payment. At the time, the deal provided immediate relief to the city's finances.
As we continue to see more and more people, more and more companies talking about leaving Chicago and Illinois, this is not the message to send.
But critics later argued the city gave up decades of potential revenue in the process. And now, many of those one-time solutions have already been used. Chicago's running out of financial tricks. Investors are starting to notice. When the city recently attempted to refinance some of its debt by issuing bonds, the offering fell $75 million short of its target. Even more concerning, the bonds that did sell required higher interest rates than those paid by New York City for unsecured debt. That difference signals growing anxiety in the financial markets about Chicago's long-term fiscal health. If the city's credit rating were downgraded, borrowing costs would climb even higher. That would place even greater pressure on future budgets.
We have an obligation to pass a budget that is honest, reliable, and truly balanced. This budget is not.
But Chicago's housing crisis and financial struggles may not be unique. Across the United States, many large cities are facing similar challenges. Rising costs, shrinking tax bases, and growing pension obligations are creating difficult choices for local governments. Chicago may simply be experiencing those pressures earlier and more intensely than others. While policymakers debate solutions, many residents are making a decision of their own. They're leaving. Chicago has been steadily losing population for years. Some estimates suggest the city has lost nearly 1 million residents over the past decade. Between 2010 and 2017 alone, the population declined by more than 220,000 people.
A lot of these changes and shifts and the ways in which people move aren't simply decisions that they are making, willfully. Chicago's losing a lot of the working class and blue-collar jobs.
For city leaders, those numbers represent more than just a demographic trend. Every resident who leaves takes tax revenue, economic activity, and community investment with them. And the reasons for leaving are often painfully familiar. High taxes remain one of the most common complaints among former residents. Chicago's combined sales tax rate of 10.25% ranks among the highest in the nation. Property taxes are significantly higher than the national average. For some families, the total cost of living in the city feels unsustainable. Others point to job opportunities elsewhere. While Chicago still hosts major corporations, many workers believe faster-growing cities offer better opportunities. Cities like Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, Nashville, and Charlotte have become popular destinations thanks to lower costs and warmer climates. Even the weather plays a role. Chicago's long, freezing winters make sunnier cities even more appealing, especially for residents already struggling with rising housing costs and taxes. Together, these pressures have pushed Chicago to a turning point. Housing costs are rising, property taxes are climbing, and the population is shrinking while leaders debate how to fix the city's finances. If affordability continues to worsen, more residents may decide the Windy City simply costs too much to call home. And if that trend continues, Chicago's challenges could be just the beginning.